The day had been grueling as usual. Drills, layups, and that signature full-court sprint had left my muscles screaming in protest. Basketball was my passion, but tonight, even passion felt like too much effort. My legs felt like dead weight when I finally stepped off the bus and trudged home, my gym bag slung over my shoulder. The house was eerily quiet when I arrived. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound greeting me, and for a brief second, I thought maybe I was alone. Our parents had left for a weekend trip to visit friends, leaving my older foster brother, Jake, and me behind. I didn't see his car outside, so I figured he'd gone out or was holed up in his room, doing whatever it was he did to kill time. Dropping my bag by the door, I stretched my sore arms overhead and let out a groan. The idea of a long, hot shower was the only thing motivating me to move. My muscles needed it, my mind needed it, heck, my whole body needed it. I climbed the stairs, dragging my feet across the floor as I passed by Jake's door. I might have kept walking if not for the faint, muffled sound that stopped me mid-step. My brow furrowed. It was a voice, low, breathy, and strained. I couldn't make out what was being said, but the tone tugged at my curiosity. I leaned in, pressing my ear just lightly against the door. The voice continued, interspersed with soft, controlled breathing. My heart began to race as realization dawned on me. Oh. I pulled back, my face instantly heating up, but my feet refused to move. Against my better judgment, I nudged the door ever so slightly with my fingertips, cracking it open just enough to peek inside. Jake was sprawled on his bed, his phone held in one hand, his face flushed and contorted in concentration. His other hand was hidden under the blanket draped over his lap, moving subtly yet unmistakably. Panic surged through me, and I jerked back, letting the door close as quietly as possible. My pulse thundered in my ears, my skin burning hot with embarrassment. What the hell had I just done? I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as I backed down the hall. My breath came in short gasps, like I just finished a game-winning sprint. Every nerve in my body felt hyper-aware, from the way my sweaty hair clung to my forehead to the cool draft seeping under the hallway window. I should have been disgusted, right? Horrified. But all I could feel was this strange, electric buzz coursing through me, like a secret I hadn't meant to discover but now couldn't unsee. I fled to the bathroom, locking the door behind me before leaning against the cool tile wall. My hands shook as I pressed them against my cheeks, hoping the cold would calm the heat burning through me. He didn't see me, I whispered to myself, as if saying it aloud would make it true. He didn't see me, but the image of him, flushed and vulnerable, wouldn't leave my mind. I shook my head, trying to dislodge it, but it was useless. It was burned into me now like a brand. Stripping out of my clothes, I stepped into the shower and let the hot water cascade over me. It felt like both a relief and a punishment. My muscles sighed with gratitude as the steam enveloped me. But my mind was a chaotic mess. Jake, my foster brother, the one who had always been just there, annoying at times, quiet at others, but never anything more than a sibling. Until now, I ran my hands through my wet hair, frustrated with myself. What kind of sister does this? Who sneaks a peek and gets affected? The worst part was knowing I couldn't avoid him forever. By the time I finished my shower and slipped into my oversized t-shirt and shorts, I had managed to somewhat steady my breathing. The heat from earlier still lingered, though it had settled deeper, somewhere I didn't know how to reach or shake off. I blamed the fatigue. Maybe that's what had me imagining things, misinterpreting the harmless reality of what I'd seen. But the truth gnawed at me like a splinter under the skin. It hadn't felt harmless. Not the way my heart pounded. Not the way my mind refused to let it go. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the hallway felt quieter than usual, like the air itself was holding its breath. I moved quickly to my room, closing the door behind me, hoping to avoid any awkward encounters. But as soon as I turned, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Jake was standing there, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, his usual smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Hey, you okay?" I swallowed hard, clutching the edge of the door like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "Why, yeah, fine." "Why?" He shrugged, his gaze flickering to the damp strands of hair sticking to my neck before settling on my eyes. "I heard you rush into the bathroom earlier. Thought something was up." "Nope. Just tired from training," I said, my voice sharper than intended. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "You sure?" "I'm sure," I snapped, then immediately softened. "Sorry, I'm just really tired." He nodded, pushing off the doorframe and stepping closer than he normally would. His presence was warm, overwhelming, and I felt trapped between him and the door. "You've been overworking yourself," he murmured, his voice lower, more intimate than usual. "You should take it easy." I laughed nervously, trying to brush past him. "I'll be fine. It's nothing new." But before I could escape, his hand gently caught my wrist, stopping me in my tracks. My breath hitched as I turned to face him, and the air between us seemed to hum with something I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. "I'm serious, though," he said, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin. "You always push yourself too hard." The casual way he said it should have made me feel normal, but the warmth of his touch on my wrist sent a shiver down my spine. I forced myself to pull away, giving a strained laugh. "Thanks for the concern, big brother." Jake's eyes flickered, something unreadable passing through them before he smiled. "Yeah, I guess that's my job." I bolted past him, retreating to the safety of my bed, and buried myself under the blankets like they could shield me from the fire still simmering under my skin. I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would make it all go away, that by tomorrow this weird, lingering tension would be forgotten, lost to the haze of morning. But it wasn't. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of the kitchen faucet running. For a second, I thought maybe everything was back to normal. Maybe Jake hadn't noticed how flustered I'd been, and today would be just another day of ignoring each other's existence unless necessary. But when I walked into the kitchen and saw him standing by the counter, shirtless, his hair messy from sleep, I knew normal was a thing of the past. He turned when he heard me, offering a lazy smile that made my stomach flip. "Morning. Coffee." Yeah. "Thanks," I muttered, sitting down at the table and hoping he wouldn't notice the way I avoided his gaze. Jake poured me a cup and slid it across the table, then leaned against the counter, watching me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "You were acting weird last night," he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. I nearly choked on my coffee. "I wasn't acting weird." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a terrible liar." "Jake, seriously." "Drop it," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. He didn't move, didn't look away. His gaze stayed locked on mine, and I felt like he could see right through me, like he knew exactly what I'd seen last night and exactly how it had affected me. "Fine," he said after a moment, pushing off the counter and walking toward me. "I'll drop it. For now. For now." The words echoed in my head long after he left the room. That night, the tension between us reached its breaking point. I had spent the entire day avoiding him, staying out of the house as long as possible and finding excuses to keep myself busy when I was home. But when evening rolled around and I heard a soft knock on my door, I knew I couldn't keep running forever. "Come in," I called, my voice barely audible. Jake stepped inside, closing the door behind him and leaning against it like he had the night before. The room felt smaller with him in it, the walls closing in as his eyes locked onto mine. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He took a seat on the edge of my bed, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "I think we both know something's different," he said, his gaze searching mine. "I don't know what it is, but it's been messing with my head." I exhaled shakily, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "You're not the only one." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick, suffocating, charged with every unspoken word we were too afraid to say. "I don't want to make things weird," he said finally. "But I also can't keep pretending this isn't happening." I looked down at my hands, twisting the hem of my shirt between my fingers. "What do you want me to say, Jake? That I haven't been thinking about it, too? Because I have. I can't stop." He reached out, his fingers brushing mine. "Then maybe we don't need to stop." I looked up, meeting his gaze, and in that moment, every wall I had built around myself crumbled. Without thinking, I leaned forward, closing the distance between us until our foreheads touched. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was enough to set every nerve in my body on fire. "Are you sure?" I whispered, my breath mingling with his. Jake nodded, his hand sliding up to cup the back of my neck. "Yeah, I'm sure." And then, just like that, the tension that had been building for what felt like forever finally broke. The days that followed were a blur, and yet every moment felt like it had been carved into my memory. The way Jake's fingers would brush against mine when we passed each other in the hallway, the stolen glances over breakfast, the way silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was something else entirely. Something heavier, like the unspoken promise of a secret we both shared. I kept expecting guilt to hit me like a tidal wave. After all, this wasn't supposed to happen. Jake was my foster brother, and no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, there was no logic to what we were doing. But the guilt never came. Instead, what filled me was a warmth, a connection I couldn't deny. The next shift came on a lazy Sunday afternoon. I had just come back from a short run, sweat dripping down my neck and clinging to my clothes as I fumbled for the kitchen faucet. I barely noticed Jake lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone, until he spoke up. "Still pushing yourself too hard?" His voice was light, teasing, but there was that familiar undercurrent of concern. I looked up and caught the smirk playing on his lips. His hair was tousled, and he was wearing the same gray t-shirt that clung to his shoulders a little too well. It took me a moment to remember how to breathe. "I'm fine. You worry too much." Jake set his phone down and stretched, his gaze fixed on me like he was considering something. "You look tense." I wiped the sweat from my forehead, laughing softly. "Yeah, my legs are killing me. Coach had us doing sprint drills today." He got up from the couch, and in a few strides he was standing right in front of me. "You should sit down. I could help with that." "Help?" My brain was already short-circuiting. "How?" He tilted his head, a playful glint in his eyes. "A massage, dummy." My heart stuttered. There was nothing inherently weird about it. People gave each other massages all the time. But this wasn't just anyone. This was Jake, and the thought of his hands on me sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, but he didn't. He took my hand and gently pulled me toward the couch, his touch making my skin tingle. "Come on, sit," he said, gesturing to the cushion beside him. I lowered myself onto the couch, trying to keep my breathing steady as he sat behind me, his knees framing my sides. "This okay?" His voice was softer now, as though he could sense the storm raging inside me. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The first touch of his hands on my shoulders was tentative, testing, but when I didn't flinch or pull away, he applied more pressure. His thumbs kneaded into the tense muscles just below my neck, and I exhaled sharply, the relief immediate and overwhelming. "God, I stopped myself from saying amazing out loud, but Jake chuckled softly behind me, clearly aware. "Told you," he murmured, his voice low. His fingers worked their way down my back, slow and deliberate, like he wasn't just easing my muscles but unraveling something deeper, something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of his touch seep into me. The tension in my body wasn't just from basketball anymore. It was from the nights I lay in bed thinking about him, from the way I tried to suppress the feelings that had grown far beyond what they should be. But here, under his hands, all those thoughts felt less dangerous. They felt right. Jake's fingers brushed against the bare skin of my neck and my breath hitched. I heard him pause as if he'd noticed. His hand stilled, and for a moment I thought he'd pull away. But instead he leaned forward, his breath warm against my ear. "You okay?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded, but the words came tumbling out anyway. "I don't want you to stop." He exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding his breath too. His hands shifted, moving down my arms until he gently pulled me back against him, my body resting against his chest. I could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, matching my own racing pulse. "Me neither," he admitted. For a moment, we stayed like that, entangled, silent, breathing each other in. I felt his hand trace slow circles against my forearm, the kind of touch that wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was steady, like he was grounding me. And then, as if some invisible line had been crossed, he tilted my chin back, forcing me to meet his gaze. There was a softness in his eyes, but beneath it, something simmered, something that had been building between us since that night outside his bedroom door. "I've been trying to hold back," he said, his voice strained. "But I can't. Not when you're this close." "You don't have to," I whispered. That was all it took. His lips found mine, soft and tentative at first, as if he was giving me a chance to change my mind. But I didn't. I leaned into him, my hands tangling in his hair as the kiss deepened, and any lingering doubts melted away. The world outside didn't exist. There was only Jake, his warmth, his touch, his breath mixing with mine. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, his forehead rested against mine, and he smiled softly. "We're really doing this, huh?" I laughed, the sound light and free, like I'd shed the weight of the last few weeks. "Yeah, I guess we are." Jake brushed a strand of hair from my face, his fingertips lingering on my cheek. "I don't know where this is going," he said honestly, "but I'm not afraid of it if you're not." I wasn't. For the first time since everything had started, I didn't feel scared. I felt free. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of secret moments. The way his hand would brush mine under the table during dinner, the late-night conversations whispered through the walls between our rooms, and the stolen kisses in the kitchen when no one was around. All of it felt like something out of a dream. But dreams have a way of ending. It wasn't long before reality knocked on our door. We had tiptoed around the inevitable for days, maybe even weeks, but as our parents' car pulled into the driveway that Friday evening, I felt the first crack in our bubble of safety. Jake squeezed my hand, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll figure this out." I nodded, hoping he was right. But deep down, I knew that whatever we had wasn't just something we could easily explain. It was messy and complicated and beautiful, and I wasn't ready to let it go.